Depending on your perspective, you could argue that the most important muscle building principle is genetics. After all, Mike Tyson in his prime was 220 pounds at low body fat, despite never having lifted a weight. This is a physique many could not achieve with a lifetime of weight training. Cynics may point to the use of steroids, as in recent years genetics have often been used as a smokescreen for steroid use. However, there is reason to believe the genetics argument may hold weight. For instance, several years ago, Chinese scientists using genetic engineering altered the genetic makeup of several dogs. The result was these dogs had far greater muscle mass and lower body fat than normal dogs. The gene involved codes for a protein called myostatin, and it's unclear how common this protein is defective in humans. The next most important muscle building principle you could argue is steroid usage. For instance, a very famous study published in the New England Journal of Medicine compared natural lifters with people who took steroids and did no exercise. They found those who did no exercise and took steroids gained 3.2 kg of muscle mass, whereas those who took steroids gained a measly, by comparison, 1.9 kg of muscle mass. I will leave a link in the description to this study. For most people who don't want to take steroids though, I'm going to argue the most important muscle building principle for most people is something called exercise periodization, also known as varying your routine. Whilst varying your routine can be an effective method of increasing your results, random variation or variation for the sake of variation may make no difference. If you are watching this video also looking to improve your athletic performance, this video will contain some important principles which you can also apply to that. Underpinning the importance of variation is a scientific principle known as neuromechanical matching. A lot of people assume that if they exercise a muscle such as the quadricep, there will be uniform growth throughout the quadricep depending on the intensity of the exercise. So if, for example, you perform squats or leg extensions, then both of these exercises will grow the quadricep. Whilst it would be true to say that both the leg extension and the squat will grow the quadricep, due to the principle of neuromechanical matching, they will in reality grow completely different regions of the quadricep. Generally, the leg extension will grow the rectus femoris muscle, a double joint quadricep muscle that acts as a hip flexor, whilst the squat will grow the single joint quadricep muscles more. The reason for this is that certain regions of the quadricep have mechanical advantages with certain movements. Whilst the easiest way to think of this is that certain regions of the muscle have better leverage for certain movements, if you want to go deeper on the science, there are several factors that will affect the regions of the muscle which are used to complete the task, such as the pronation angle and the angle of peak torque. So to provide some substantiation so I'm not pulling facts out of thin air, as with the steroid study I mentioned earlier, I will leave a link in the description to all the studies mentioned during the making of this video. Scientists from Japan looked at the effects of squat training with different depths on lower limb muscle volumes. You are free to pause the video if you don't have enough time to read the study's excerpts on screen. They found that the rectus femoris did not grow with either full or half squat training. In contrast, it has been shown that leg extensions grow the rectus femoris muscle more than any other quadricep muscle in studies such as this one out of Japan. This particular study dealt with lowering weights. You might sometimes hear this type of exercise referred to as negatives, but the key point is about the regions of the muscle which are activated, not the type of muscle contraction. Getting even more precise, once you have looked at the quadricep at an individual level, there is evidence of growth at different ends of the muscle. For instance, this study out of Brazil looked at the effects of 14 weeks of resistance training on muscle growth in the rectus femoris, which, as I said before, is one of the four quadricep muscles. They used two very similar and yet slightly different exercises. Firstly, a conventional leg extension exercise as shown here. Secondly, an isokinetic leg extension as shown here. If you look at this graph from the results section of the paper, You can see the conventional resistance training caused greater growth of the quadricep at the proximal end of the rectus femoris, meaning nearer the hip joint. Meanwhile, the isokinetic training regime caused greater growth of quadricep at the distal end of the quadricep, meaning nearer the knee joint. At this point, it would probably be good to point out exactly how many muscle fibers, or you could say muscle cells, make up some of the popular muscles such as bicep, tricep, quadricep, etc. A study out of the University of Ontario in Canada compared the number of muscle fibers between bodybuilders and control subjects, aka normal people. They found that elite bodybuilders had on average 290,000 muscle fibers in their bicep. You can see it here in this table as a corrected figure of 290.7, but if you look at the scale above the row heading, you can see that you have to multiply the figures in the table by 1,000. I will leave a link in the description to the study if you want to investigate it for yourself. The untrained subjects had on average 278,000 muscle fibers. It's a debatable issue as to why the bodybuilders had more muscle fibers in their bicep compared to the untrained subjects, but it's not something I'm going to explore here. If we were to look at other muscles, it's very likely we would find more muscle fibers. It's known that triceps are a larger muscle group than the biceps, and the quadriceps are a larger muscle group still. Regional hypertrophy, aka muscle growth, has been observed in the upper body when comparing the horizontal and incline bench press. The difference between these two exercises may seem like splitting hairs, or it does to me at least. However, the overall point is that different exercises and different regions of the muscle need to be exercised if you want to exercise all 200,000+ muscle fibers. So looking at this study from Brazil which compared muscle growth between a group trained with a horizontal bench press, incline bench press, and a combination training group. If you look at this table from the results section, muscle thickness was measured at the second intercostal space, third intercostal space, and fifth intercostal space. Whilst the effect did not reach statistical significance, the combination training group overall caused a trend of most muscle growth, especially at the second intercostal space. A major limitation of this study was the similarity between the two bench press exercises and the fact that subjects only trained once a week for 8 weeks. If the training period continued, it's likely the trends may have reached the point of statistical significance. So, in conclusion, there are over 200,000 muscle fibers as a conservative estimate in each muscle. In order to grow the most muscle or optimize your time spent in the gym, a combination of exercises will likely yield the best results. Comparing the horizontal bench press with an incline bench press may be splitting hairs. However, combining a bench press with an overhead press will very likely achieve better results than a bench press alone.